Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
How you doing, Dave?
How you doing?
Pretty good. I know that I'm taking some heat for the weather barometer thing lately, but there's sunshine peeking through, which it's better than it's been. It's been foggy and kind of gray in the mornings, but like the weather's super sweet. So feels like early spring or something to me now that we've had past the equinox. So for what it's worth, I think we're in a good place here.
Always use a little bit more rain, but the sunshine is nice.
True enough. Speaking of sunshine, Thad, why don't you tell us what's on the cover of the North Coast Journal?
This week we have our annual story that usually runs Sunshine Week. We had something else slated in that we had to run last week, so it's running a week late, but it is the Foily Awards for 2022. And Muckrack and the Electronic Freedom Foundation every year compile kind of the most egregious public records abuses from across the country and put them together in this very tongue-in-cheek award presentation called the Foilies, where they give awards for kind of folks who have done bad as far as providing the public with the records they rightly deserve. And this year, Humboldt County agencies make an appearance. So
yay!
Right. So we wanted to highlight that, and I guess I'll just give folks a quick preview of that. That was actually in relation to a Public Records Act request the Journal submitted. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Office in providing records of police shootings. Basically took an egregiously long time, 2 years, to fulfill the request, in part because they were redacting the records that were being released of all kinds of information that had already been made public. The most egregious example of it was they took the time to go through a press release that they had already sent out and had already been published in multiple news outlets to redact someone's name from it for reasons that kind of defy explanation. So that's kind of an example of some of the stuff in the Foilies.
So that actually made the EFF, like the formal list, or is this a local list that you guys have created?
No, this is the national list. We are big time. Yeah.
Great.
It's a prestigious award.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So what you've talked about is the public records release. Can you tell us a little bit about California Public Records Act, so for context for folks, so that they know kind of how these things come about, how they become public?
Yeah, so the California Public Records Act is kind of the defining law in California that governs the release of public documents and what records held by public agencies members of the public have access to. And so on the surface, the idea is really simple. It's that, as the people, we have created these institutions to provide us services, and we have a right to know what they're doing and what records they hold. And so kind of every record within, the public realm is considered public unless there's good reason to withhold it. And so certainly, there are very good reasons to keep some records out of public view. For instance, every public agency has payroll records that have, bank account information, social security numbers of employees, and there's very good reasons those shouldn't be, disseminated publicly. But the idea is that all of the decision-making documents and stuff like that should be in the realm of the public. And in this week's editorial, I quote from the preamble of the California Public Records Act, which I think really kind of explains, the main idea behind the act, which is the people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people, in delegating authority, do not give the public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for the people to know. The people insist they must retain control over the instruments they have created. And, to me, it all comes back to the idea is that information is power, and our public agencies are acting on our behalf. And so we have a right to know what information they're acting on.
Well, right on. So it is truly the people's business, and it's codified in the state of California. They have access where relevant and where redacting for, like you said, private information that is available to us. So with that in mind, Sunshine Week, I guess, is a way to kind of, sort of publicly celebrate this sunlight is the best disinfectant or something, whatever that cliche is. What's on your radar as a news editor, North Coast Journal? What kind of things have you guys been working on with the California Public Records Act for this sunlight being the disinfectant?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things that we're doing. I think one thing that I guess two kind of common misconceptions that I really want folks to be aware of, and I think it's just really important to reinforce, especially during in and around Sunshine Week. But one is, I think there's this misconception that like only journalists can use the California Public Records Act, and it's a tool of the media, or it's a tool of attorneys. And really, I mean, it is designed to be accessible to everyone, and so any member of the public can ask for records at any time. That's what a government for and by the people is about. And I think it seems daunting to a lot of people, and it shouldn't, because the law states that you do not need to fill out a complex form. You do not need to cite legal statutes or anything like that. You can just walk into a government office and ask for public records, and they are bound to treat that as an official legal request, and they're bound to give them to you, based on all the legal statutes and timeframes. So it doesn't have to be this daunting proposition. Really, you can do it quite simply in person. You can do it over the phone, or if you want to write an official letter, there are all kinds of templates online. The California First Amendment Coalition has a bunch of really good ones that you can download and modify to the specific agency and the specific records you're looking for.
That's really awesome. I had no idea, and I consider myself like a policy nerd kind of, or junkie, and I had no idea that was anybody could just go do that. So thank you for sharing that with everybody today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to know. And then the other thing I think that I really want folks to know, and especially as the journal is kind of getting ready to report on some things that we've been working on, is that for all of its strengths and all of the things that are wonderful about the California Public Records Act, ultimately, I think a shortcoming of it is that there's really no enforcement mechanism. There's no penalty for noncompliance, and there's no, we talked a couple weeks ago about the Fair Political Practices Commission, which is kind of the legal arm of California to enforce transparency provisions. There's no arm of government that oversees the California Public Records Act request. So if we ask a public agency for records and they say they don't exist, or they have them, but there are legal reasons they can't disclose them publicly, or aren't bound to disclose them publicly, we have two choices. We either take their word for it, or we file a legal action to challenge that, which essentially, it's commonly referred to as suing a public agency, but we're not asking for money. What we're asking is, let's put this matter before a judge who can look at all the information and be an independent arbitrator, essentially. And unfortunately, that's a step we've had to take numerous times throughout my tenure at the Journal, and then especially in recent months. And so I don't want to get into all the nitty gritty of it, but people will read short and soon about some of these actions we've taken and some of these records that agencies have initially declined to disclose, and after we have gotten attorneys involved, have in some cases decided that it's appropriate to release them, and in some cases had a judge decide for them that it's appropriate that these be released to the public.
So it sounds like your answer to me saying, hey, what kind of stuff have you guys been working on? In your editorial, you mentioned that you keep your lawyer busy. Anything you want to share with us now, or is that just we should wait until we see him in print?
No, I mean, it's about you, David.
What did I do? I didn't know. It wasn't me.
I really don't want to get into the specifics of what we've asked for, but what I'll say is, sometimes I think also a lot of the times the public kind of sees these issues as black and white. And if a public agency declines to disclose something, that they're, acting nefariously and trying to hide information from the public. And a lot of times I think it's important for folks to know that there's competing interests. And so, For example, if we are looking for employee records or employee disciplinary records, the public agency, reasonably has some concern about liability. If they release information that they're not supposed to, the employee might be able to sue that public agency for violating their employee rights. And so there's things like that that often come into play, and that's why we're thankful to have the courts to go to say, hey, look at this and tell us what's what. I think the unfortunate thing in this is that, that even though we're not filing lawsuits seeking damages or seeking money from a public agency, these things take time and they inevitably cost money. And so as a small locally owned media company, we don't have a team of attorneys on retainer. So what we do have is a wonderful First Amendment attorney, Paul Nicholas Boylan, who's based in Davis, and he believes fervently in transparency. And so what he does is he takes these cases on contingency for us. And that means that he believes in the cause and wants to fight on our behalf, and he believes that we have a good case. And so he agrees to take the case, saying that we won't pay him a dime, and that at the end, if we're successful, then he'll try to pursue regaining his attorney fees through the public agency. So if there is a judgment in our favor and a court determines that X public agency has abused its authority in refusing to release these records, he'll then file a fee motion with the court, which basically says, hey, look, I did this. It was their fault that we had to take this step to get these rightfully public records out in public view, and so they should pay for my time. And that's not cheap often. When we had a case, a fairly high-profile case against the city of Eureka regarding video footage of an arrest some years ago, and they ended up paying him more than $90,000.
Wow.
So sometimes this kind of feels like a zero-sum gain in that we are trying to get information that we believe should be public. We're trying to get public agencies to work with us to determine what should rightfully be made public. And we realize that if we bring a legal action against them and are successful, which, we feel like is important because we feel like these records belong in the public, ultimately it's taxpayers who pay for that mistake. And so I just want folks to know that, these aren't things we do without a lot of thought and a lot of attempt to try to reconcile differences with the public agency on the front end. But ultimately, as I think I stated in the preamble to the California Public Records Act, this is important, and we feel like that level of transparency is very important. So we're going to continue fighting for it.
Well, right on. So like the corollary to sunlight is the best disinfectant is democracy dies in darkness. So it is the good fight of the Fourth Estate. So we really do appreciate your efforts, and thank you for covering the Foilies for this week. You didn't give me any teasers this time, but now I'll go check it out once it's published in the coming day or so. I guess that we'll be able to check it out and see for ourselves what some of these interesting stories are. Especially like the cover image is a golden toilet, which alludes to President Trump's. I think it's allegations. I don't know if there's anybody that's ever admitted or said for sure that it's true, but that he was like hand shredding documents and flushing them down the toilet in the White House.
That's the report. I don't know that anybody has gone through the pipe, so to speak, to
no.
I will say that I hope that this inspires people to take up that opportunity to be nosy and just, when you're sitting and wondering, somebody ought to find out, like make that request. It's, while, as Thad pointed out, sometimes getting it, actually materialized is a slog. The request can be made by anybody. You actually don't have to storm the Capitol building and steal anyone's laptop. You can literally just walk into an office and ask.
I think that's good advice for folks, because democracy is not just one day a year on election day. It allows people to become activists in their own right. So that's great advice. Thanks, Jen.
Absolutely.
So Thad, thank you again. We will obviously look forward to seeing and hearing more about what these California Public Records Acts reveal and enlighten us in the near future.
Stay tuned.
Exactly. How about you, Jen? What is going on this week on the Arts and Features Beat?
I am extremely excited because this week we have another great Art Beat story from L.L. Kestner, who is writing this time about Gina Tuzzi. And Gina Tuzzi, you may have seen her work around town. She's very bright, very colorful. Well, she is herself very bright and colorful, but she loves color. And so her work always has a lot of just a full spectrum of color. And there's something really joyful about it too. And while you can see her work around at Arts Alive and, Art Arcada and other places, you also can see it weirdly in the movie The Sky is Everywhere, but it's not really her work. And I'll explain that. So you may recall The Sky is Everywhere was filmed locally and has lots of shots of Eureka and the redwoods and, local scenery, etc. It's a YA novel adaptation. And real talk, the reviews were unkind.
Oh.
Humboldt looks very good, and if my mother taught me nothing else, it's that how good you look is what matters. So, it's a beautiful looking movie too. It's got a lot of, again, color. It's very like theater kid vibes. And it also has a lot of paintings. I don't know about you, but I am secretly, I guess not secretly now, I'm talking about it on TV, obsessed with fake paintings in movies. When somebody's supposed to be an artist and they show them painting and you're just like, you're an actor. How are you? And sometimes the paintings are really cheesy, i.e. all Lifetime movies, which I love. So whenever there's art or there's, also fake rock bands in teen movies. Anyway, but in this case, the art's actually kind of interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because the folks who made the movie tapped Gina Tuzzi to make a lifetime's worth of paintings for the character that Cherry Jones, veteran character actor, plays. She's a grandmother and she's artsy and into her garden and, semi-hippie, I guess. Anyway, she has been painting her whole life, right? So they were like, well, you can't just go out and thrift a lifetime's worth of paintings in one style. So they turned to Gina, who consulted with them on things like, what the written character was like, because she didn't even know what this was going to be for. So she couldn't go and read the novel. She couldn't, the movie wasn't done, obviously. So she had to go with the character notes that they gave her. And so she took this information and she thought about the character and thought, okay, over a lifetime, you've had time. She paints a lot of portraits. You've had time to paint your daughter and your granddaughters as they're growing up. She took inspiration from the ideas about what her house was going to be like in the movie and tried to figure out what her personality was like, what she would be into, what her skill level would be like. And then she painted from there. And
Wow.
She made a couple dozen paintings that all are by this other person, sort of channeling this imaginary character, which is very cool. And if you look in the paper and online, you'll see there are some things that are similar. Some things match up. Both Gina and Cherry Jones's character love color. So things are bright, things are vibrant. There's a lot of very feminine energy, because there's a lot of paintings of women, etc. But it's vastly different. I would not have probably looked at these two styles and thought, oh, that's by the same person. It just didn't occur to me. At one point, actually, the folks who were asking for all this from her, all the people working on the movie, asked her to dial it back a little bit because they had to remind her that, in fact, this is a self-taught person. This is a person without training. And so you need to kind of take back the skill level a little bit, which is a nice thing to be told. But
this is actually really cool.
It is really cool. And part of her thing about the character development was she thought, okay, how old is this person? And so what was sort of not exactly trending, but what was a popular painting style that she might have seen? Who would have been her influences? What painters would she be looking at as somebody who's self-taught and just sort of looking at art? And she made a whole FBI profile about this woman and then paint it accordingly. And it's kind of fascinating. So in the film, there are a couple of paintings. So she was able to share with us a couple of the paintings that you'll see in the paper and online. But she's also going to have a show that opens at Epitome Gallery on Arts Alive. I think it's Epitome Gallery. Is it? It is, right? And that's going to be in April. So you can go and see her work. And I don't know, it might be kind of cool to see the movie and look at her work and then go see her work in April and do a compare and contrast. It's very interesting. It kind of reminds me of, like, you know, people who do art fraud, but not.
This is so this character Fiona's art persona, that's the role she played in this film, which is pretty neat.
It is pretty cool. And it's a weird feat of, you know, painterly ventriloquism, right?
Yeah. Right on. So I'm going to definitely go check it out because I'm very curious now.
Yeah. And, you know, if you haven't read it already, read LL's story, because it's really, it brings up some interesting questions, you know, things that you might not have thought about before when you look at, you know, the things in the background of a movie, you know, where everything comes from. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, right on. So in addition to this story for this week's edition, what else are you covering this week in the Arts and Features Beats?
Bacon.
Oh my goodness.
So much bacon, but not the bacon maybe that you were expecting. Wendy Chan is back with belly. She has brought pork belly to the table and is telling us how she makes her, I want to make sure I'm saying this, lapyuk, I think. I'm really bad with the pronunciation. I'm sorry. But lapyuk is a kind of, it's like a, you know, cured pork belly, but it's not the smoky American version. It is a Chinese, specifically Cantonese type that her mom used to make, and her husband liked her mom's recipe, so she got it from her mom, you know, did the whole like phone call, rough measurements. And as usual, everything was eyeballed, a little of this, a little of that, but Wendy broke it down to measurements that you and I can recreate. She has some important tips from us. It involves hanging the stuff outside and inside for like 3 days. Pro tip, hang it high, because her Labradane, an adorable dog, feasted on the first batch that she tried. And like, can you even be mad at this dog for doing what we all would do?
Lucky dog. I think this is my spirit animal now. The pork belly dog is my spirit animal.
Yeah, I mean, if I go over to visit Wendy, she better hang it above 5'3". That's what I'm saying. But yeah, it's a very cool, and it's actually simpler. It's time consuming, but it's actually simpler than you think. And she recommends it as like a gift item. It's not crazy to make your own lapyuk and then share it as gifts. I would not be mad if some showed up.
Yeah.
I will 100% accept pork belly gifts.
Right? Absolutely. So it's a very cool recipe. And also in the issue this week, we have David Jervis reviewing Man of La Mancha from Ferndale Repertory Theater, which is a fun return to theater. And we're happy to have him going out and reviewing theater again. It's lovely.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to have to check that out online too. Thanks, Jen, for filling us in on what you guys are covering this week. I think that's about all the time we have. So we'll check in with you again next week.
Right on. We'll see you next week, David.
You got it. North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick one up, stay informed. Also available 24/7 online, so you can check it out anytime, especially if you're down with the lapyuk. I think that's something worth checking out. I gotta get me some. Thad, Jennifer, thank you again so much, and we will connect with you again next week.
Thanks, Dave.